All right, everybody, this is Sheets, and I'm joined by, obviously by Bobby and our old friend Brandon Cruz from the resident, not even the resident, one of the leading NASCAR DFS experts in the world. And as far as I'm concerned, if not the best, one of the best combinations of just brutal honesty, says what he believes in a good way, doesn't think he's smarter than the rest of the world, and really gives people a good framework for how to play NASCAR DFS. Now, to give you kind of a little bit of background, everybody, again, the reason why one of these we started the site is, people wanted to know, Bobby, like, how do you play? What do you do? And they asked me, what types of places do you look for content, things like that. And before I even played it all, Brandon's site was, his YouTube channel was where I went for content. I mean, look, I knew Stevie from Roto Grinders, like the big sites and stuff like that. But, my view is that if everybody was watching the same content, I wanted to just kind of see what else is out there. And Brandon, I enjoyed his YouTube videos quite a bit. And so when I started to play, I relied on him for just kind of overall slate previews. And so I reached out to him maybe about a year ago, and he came on here and talked about his stuff. And I'm just, in pure transparency, I am a paid subscriber to his Patreon. I have no, revenue sharing deals with him or anything like that. You're getting my exact opinion. I mean, I pay for it. I think it's a great site, and I think that he does a great job. So what I want to do is, first, I do want to talk about, let me talk about your site for a second. So as usual, with most DFS content, he gives, way too much away for free, like most content providers do. And if you do sign up for his Patreon, you'll get access to his projections, whatever. But what I found is the whole Patreon model, and you could just, feel free to correct me on this, whatever. For me, the Patreon model was more of a look, is to really be a patron. In other words, listen, I know I'm giving a lot away for free, and the additional stuff you get may not be that much more than you're getting, whatever, but you're supporting me by paying for the Patreon. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I do. Like, I pay for his stuff on the Patreon. And also, usually whenever I get a big hit, I'll just throw him some money also, just kind of like a tip or things like that.
Yeah,
that's the first thing I want to ask you. Tell me about like the biz life. Tell me about the Patreon. Tell me your content provider life right now.
Well, I'll give you the summary of like last year. I mean, you kind of summed it up there to where I wanted to use Patreon more for, people supporting me for what I do. Cause I'm one of the few people who like really dive into specifically the truck series and the Xfinity series, which takes a lot of time. Like, there's a reason people don't do that, because this is hours and hours worth of like research during the week. And so I started the Patreon mainly last year to be like, hey, in case you like what I do or you want to support me, I also give you my projections, but it's mainly a support type of platform that I want to use it for. And then Pierce said he wanted to come along this year, and I was like, yeah, sure. And I want to push the same thing. Like, obviously, I think we're putting out really good content this year, but there's a reason. If you go on the Patreon page, the first things I have up there is supporting us and supporting the work that we do. Obviously, we give you guys projections and we help you guys out with a lot of research, but it's really to support the work that Pierce and I do for you guys.
Got it. So here's a question I have, an overall question about NASCAR. Somebody wants to play NASCAR DFS. Okay. They don't want to go and do the deep dive. They don't want to, do whatever. They want to use sites like yours and mine, I guess. But let's just start with sites like yours to help them, just help them make money. They don't want to make millions playing NASCAR. They want to just make some money. And if they play other sports, they want to say occasionally play NASCAR to try to diversify their DGen portfolio, sort of. And so how does, I was going to ask, is there still an edge in NASCAR? Let's leave that for another discussion. Like, how would you go about using, okay, you go to Brandon's site, right? You look at all the YouTube videos, you watch the YouTube videos, you look at the projections. Then what do you do? Like, how is a person going to make money playing NASCAR, playing GPPs, for example?
I'm actually going to answer this using feedback that I've gotten from not necessarily like low stake players, but people that use my stuff last year and this year that play maybe like, 10, $20, a race or something, very low stakes. And a lot of the feedback that I got from people was specifically with the heat map that I put on the little Patreon, or that I upload there. It's a little PDF that you can open on your phone or your laptop or whatever. And a lot of feedback that I got was somebody would bring that up on their phone, and they would be on their laptop, and they would specifically just use the color coordination that I use for the drivers to build lineups, in a sense that if they weren't able to do a lot of research, or if they just wanted to get in really quick, that's mainly the reason why I kept the PDF around this year, is because a lot of people just like to look at that really quick in case they don't have the time to really dive into stuff. Because I list, you can see my projections in terms of what I have guys scoring, but then I color coordinate them of like, well, this is basically what I would use for cash, or this is what I would use for a guy that I'm expecting to lead a lot of laps. And I just got a lot of feedback saying that it was really easy to build lineups really quickly using that.
So you see, you mentioned projections. I just, it's funny. It's been a year since we last spoke, and I don't know if you know this, but one of the things that I've kind of made my project is to kind of really aggregate projections, like from all over the place. And so what I do is, for every sport that I do it with, is I download projections from all the different models that I have access to, and before I even put them out there, I spend like several months back testing them all and seeing how they compare to the actual results. And based on those numbers, I then decide how to weight each individual model and this, that, and the other thing. And just as far as, just to disclose, like Brandon's projections were one of the ones that I used or whatever. And one thing I found, and this is actually kind of cool, that if you guys want to, access Brandon's projections directly, whatever, is there's a lot of people out there that when they put models, they do projections, they'll put a median out there and they'll say, okay, sometimes this will happen, sometimes this will happen. On average, it's going to get something like this. What Brandon does, whether he's doing it on purpose or not, he actually basically takes a stand on like the race. He's like, I don't want my range of outcomes. I want to know what's going to happen today. Now I know that's not easy, but that's what your projections are. They're like, this is based on everything else. This is how I think he's going to finish today, not the range of distributions. You know what I mean? This is how I think he's going to do today. And so what happens is and I'm kind of left in a weird quandary, because when I upload the projections and things like that, your projections always carry more weight than all the others, and for two reasons. Number one, because quite honestly, they've been more accurate than the others, and I'll just give everybody that. And number two, they're always higher, sort of, because you're always like saying, okay, I literally think the guy's going to win. I don't think he's going to win 2% of the time, from third, 4% of the time, whatever. And based on get a meeting like this, I think Kyle Larson's going to win. I'm going to give him a 90 projection or whatever it is, and the rest of the industry have like 66 or something because of whatever. So what you'll find, by the way, everybody, if you access my stuff, which aggregates them all, you're gonna get a lot of Brandon, because Brandon, I mentioned before, he's kind of really is a voice of the people. You want to know who's going to win. You want to know who he actually likes in this particular race. His projections are going to be, pretty high, and you'll end up like locking guys in, and you got to like live that GPP life of having of living with that. So yeah, I don't want to share it all, but yeah, he referred to a PDF that he puts out that just basically cuts right to it. He color codes them and things like that. Let me ask you this, and this is a follow-up from last year. What kind of edge, if any, do you think there is in playing NASCAR? Now, you could separate that by Cup versus trucks versus Xfinity or whatever it is. I mean, can you make money?
Yeah, I think you can certainly make money, and I think the main edge that NASCAR has seen over the past couple of years, whether it be due to COVID or due to the changing nature of the sport, is pretty much the last 3 years, the game has been completely different of how you approach it week in and week out. Like this year, or let me go back. So before COVID, we had, a standard race weekend to where most series had 2 practice sessions, a qualifying session, a race session. And so you had like that type of history and that type of data to look at. And then when you went into COVID, the last, 2 years, basically, they had no practice and no qualifying, to where the teams would basically just show up and run with whatever they believed was the correct way to prepare the race cars. And the data to use from really those races were the long runs during the races. It was really paying more attention to how the racetrack was in terms of temperature. Was it a night race? Was it a day race? What certain package they were running? And so a lot of the data that you had pre-COVID kind of got nullified, and then you just had to start looking at the data like during COVID. And then entering this year, we now have practice again for the weekends. Now granted, it's a smaller version than what it was 3-4 years ago, but that's another, I guess, learning curve, or a kind of like a slate cleaner that you can use this year basically my point is like, I think the edge is just adapting and knowing that it's changed the last like 3 years, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And one thing that's kind of cool, again, I always like talking about this stuff, because one of the reasons I play NASCAR is the same reason I play League of Legends. It's the same reason I play golf and everything, is that every sport is just so different. And I find that really, really interesting. And one of the things that's really interesting as we kind of transition into this week is that, okay, so when somebody says, oh, how do you play this? Or what's your strategy for this? We're like, well, it depends on the slate, whatever it is. With respect to NASCAR, it's even more the case, because the way you play one particular type of track even is different than the way you would play another type of track. A couple of people in Discord is like, do you usually play one dominator or two dominators? You want to play it literally week to week, it just is completely different. Like one week you'll have this bowl track, like I call it, like Yonkers Raceway, like a half-mile track, where you just run around and get freaking dizzy, and you get one guy to get to the front. I mean, it's over. You know what I mean? Like you could get like millions of dominator points that way, and you got to handicap that race and build your lineups just so much differently, as opposed to like a week like this week and several like it, where because of, I guess, the ways the cars are constructed and the way the track is constructed, basically the cars just all line up in like rows of three. They're all 1 inch from each other. No one's going to lead the race more than a handful of laps. And even if you knew which one it was going to be, which is impossible, it wouldn't even matter. And basically they all kind of bunch up, and there's invariably like 3 different wrecks. So all you're going to want are people that are just starting in the back, so you get these place differential points. But the point is that each week is a new puzzle, and it's a new type of puzzle, which is one of the things I find really, really interesting. Which is also one of the reasons why I almost don't want you to come on before Daytona, because Daytona is just such a different animal than kind of everything else. And I actually enjoy the other tracks more than Daytona, but because it's paying $1 million for first, everybody kind of wants a piece. Let me ask you this about Daytona, because it is $1 million for first. This is the way my brain works. Okay, so if you go to all of the content providers from here to Kingdom Come, that's worth anything, they'll tell you exactly kind of what I just told you, is that because of the way plate racing works, because the way it all happens, you're supposed to play all these guys that are in the back. You'll hear the term stack from the back. You'll hear whatever it is. And it certainly makes a lot of sense. And this is what goes through some people's minds. Okay, they're like, okay, it's funny. I know you're supposed to do that, but boy, oh boy, I can get Denny Hamlin. You know what I mean? Like on the pole, or I know you're supposed to do that, but boy, oh boy, I can get this guy. Or then people get really, really screwed up. They're like, yeah, you know what? I know you're supposed to do that, but if everybody's doing it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to be contrarian. So I'm going to play a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 because no one else is going to play it. And well, great. Congratulations. You'll have a unique lineup that has no chance to win, right? And so that's what's kind of cool about it, is no matter how many content providers say this, you still get like the pole sitter with like 15% ownership somehow. And I actually believe that it's not exactly all because they're morons. I think that people really just try to be contrarian so much somehow that they kind of like lose focus. Like you've talked about, Brandon's talked about this in his videos sometimes, especially with the plate races, he says, I don't know if this is actually going to get optimal per se, but this is like kind of good enough that'll put me in a winning position. And if I happen to get lucky and it's optimal, great. Because this is what Bob, you think about this like like baseball, right? If you went back at the end of every baseball slate and said what the optimal lineup was, okay, what you'd find is you could put together a list of like 100 different solo home runs, right? That you could never have gotten right in the first, beforehand.
I don't think I've ever seen the optimal baseball lineup actually played on a full slate. You know what I mean?
Right. So now it's different in NASCAR because there are only 6 drivers. The optimal is just probably going to get hit, almost all the time. But the thing is what people are looking at, and I've seen, and even you did this, and Pierce does it, they all do this. They'll go to past races and they'll say, okay, in the past 10 Daytonas, one of them had an 8, a 12, a 32, a 35, and a 36. One of them had a this. One of them had this. In 40% of the results, two came from this, 2 came from this. And what people then do, they confuse themselves. They say, okay, because that's the way that happened before, that's exactly the way I'm going to play now. You know what I mean? Like, because it happened to be that one guy got 2 guys came from the 10th and 19th, then I'm going to play 2 guys from the 10th and the 19th. And because number one, sample size isn't enough to make that worth anything. And number 2, just because that happened before doesn't mean it's going to happen this time. And you're pigeonholing yourself in a certain type of builds. And where I think your approach is like really cool, just play the guys, play the guys in the back, and and just kind of roll with it. And again, I hate to over talk, you know what I mean, because you're the expert, but these are the things that I kind of think about. How would you approach now? You usually play about 20 lineups, right?
Actually for the plate races, I usually spend a substantially or a higher amount of money. So at least this weekend, I'll probably be doing, certainly for the truck series, I think I'll probably enter about 30, 35 lines. Because I usually focus on weeks like this, and kind of going back to the issue, or not the issue, but the thing that you brought up, saying like, oh, the pole sitters always, own, 10, 15, we got to play Denny Hamlin starting up front. I think a portion of that really does come from people like building a line and then like not seeing a big name in the line or in the lineup you've created, and overriding your brain and saying, okay, well, I need to actually play like a well-named or a guy who's a good real life racer, because it's scary to build a lineup that's filled with ugly drivers, or that a lineup that leaves $8,000, $10,000 on the table. I think that's a real thing that people run into the issue of, and I think that's why it pushes ownership to people who necessarily don't have a very high chance of being optimal or even a very good DFS play.
What's interesting? One of the things we keep threatening to do this, but we just never get around to it. Bobby's one of he's the hardest working man in show business as far as DFS goes. He's always playing, and now with this site taking up too much of his time, he's doing that too. And I always think about when I hit something in tennis, when I hit something in LOL, Bobby said, let's do a video of you showing me how to play this sport, and we just never do it. You know what I mean? No, it's probably a waste of time. But Bobby, one thing that I don't think anybody realizes, Bobby is really one of the smartest people like that I know. Okay. And I don't know what his brain's working, but I know how it works a little bit. And I know that Bobby, if he played these sports, would do well, because this is how someone like super sharp in DFS, like Bobby, this is how he would, I think, would approach like NASCAR. Like if he never played before. First of all, one thing that's cool about NASCAR, especially this race, Bobby, is that you can leave like 15,000 on the table in some cases, and still be okay. And Bobby's totally chill with that. And he could care less what the names of the players are. You know what I mean? Like, and he could care less as long as if it's a good idea, he'll leave money on the table. But this is what would go through Bobby's head. I'm telling you, he's like, okay, so everybody's playing these guys in the back. Okay, it makes a lot of sense from a math perspective. But how owned are these guys going to be? Okay, well, let me think about it. Okay, if all these guys are going to be owned, I could probably play a guy in the front and get low ownership, but boy, wouldn't it be cool to maybe play guys in the back, but just not the high owned ones? You know what I mean? Like do the exact same thing, but if I have one guy who's lower owned at maybe 1 point less projection than somebody else who's going to be fitting that same mold. I mean, the one thing that's cool, Bobby, is since there's so many dupes, that if you can get one guy, just one little dude, you know what I mean, that differentiate yourselves, it's a freaking gold mine. Okay, so tell me about that type of strategy, Brandon. Like, so you stay true to whatever, but then you just maybe, I don't know, play like lower owned guys that fit that same model.
Yeah, and Bobby, I know you play a lot of MLB and NBA primarily, no?
NFL, and PGA.
I gotcha. One thing, and some people might say it's lazy, but what I do for these types of races, the drivers starting 25th on back, so 25th to 40th, I literally project them all to finish 20th. Like some people might say, hey, you're being lazy, you're not putting the work, but this is the plate races specifically, it's completely an equal playing field for DFS, to where I just give everybody a base projection of 20th. And it, if you compare that with what projected ownership shows, you can then just play, lower owned guys that I would argue have the exact same amount of percentage to score the same, if not more, than, the guys that everybody's focusing on. And so that I think that's an aspect that people don't talk about enough, because I don't have any ownerships with me right now. And then we don't have the qualifying for the 500 right now. But if there's like big name drivers in the back, all the projections, kind of what Eric talked about in the beginning of how I don't really do median projections, I just do one solid projection. If you do median projections, it'll show like the big name drivers will obviously look like a bigger or a better DFS play than the other guys, whereas realistically they're all the exact same. And I don't think that's played out enough at these races.
So you mentioned qualifying and stuff. What I want to go over is the schedule for this week, because I myself am somewhat confused. And this is something that Bobby would be good at, because for me it's like totally frustrating. Some races, I say most races, what most races do, Bobby, is they come up with the starting positions, a couple of days ahead of time, and that's really what it's all about. The salaries come out. Sometimes salaries come, FanDuel, they come out before the starting positions, and it's all basically what starting positions you are that dictate place differential, or whatever. So you really can't even build lineups until the starting lineup is drawn. It's usually a couple of days ahead of time. But there are some races that are just like, especially towards the end of the year, where you have like these playoff races where, based on what happens in a race 2 hours beforehand, they don't release the actual starting lineup until like an hour before the race starts. And it's a huge freaking scramble for everybody to build all their lineups kind of within the hour. It's basically like the NBA, you know what I mean? And you only have like an hour to freaking work this stuff. Tell me though, when did the starting grid come out for this event this week? Tell me a little bit about the way the duel thing works, because the duel, there's the duel is set, right? Tell me what the duel is for tonight, and tell me when we can actually build lineups for Daytona.
Okay, so like the duels tonight are left over from an archaic age in racing. So used to the Daytona 500, which is the Super Bowl of NASCAR, used to have nearly, 60, 70, 80 people trying to make the event. And so instead of doing a traditional qualifying session of you do one lap, if you're fast, you get in, if you're slow, you get out, since they had such a huge number of drivers trying to make it in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, they had basically qualifying races, which are the duels today, or what we know them as the duels today. And so you would still take a single car qualifying lap, which they did last night, that then sets you up for the qualifying races. Well, we don't have, 80, 90, 70 people trying to qualify anymore. Now it's 42 drivers for 40 positions. And so I'm not saying these duels are useless, but in terms of like importance, they basically hold no importance. All this does is basically send one team home from each race, and that's it. And so used to, you would have these races be door to door, like high stress situations, to where basically now it's a 60 lap practice session for everybody but like the three guys trying to race their way in. Following that, however they finish in these races sets the inside and the outside line for the Daytona 500 on Sunday.
So when will we know the starting grid for the Daytona 500?
As soon as these races are done tonight. So I'm assuming maybe 10 p.m. Eastern.
Okay. And what about the Xfinity and the trucks?
So Xfinity or the Truck Series qualifies tomorrow. I don't have it up with me right now. I if I remember correctly, it's like 11 a.m. Eastern time. I can pull it up right fast. And then Xfinity qualifies Saturday morning at like 9 a.m. Eastern. So we'll have the qualifying grid for both those races, at least by midday on both Friday and Saturday.
So think about this is like so weird in a sense, Bobby. So they already have the salaries for the Daytona 500 out,
Mhm.
and these numbers here are just, they mean nothing. In other words, until you know where all these guys are starting, like it's to put the salaries out, it's almost ridiculous, you know. So because what could end up happening is, let's say that if Denny Hamlin like starts, they whatever, however they determine it, if he starts on the pole at 10.5, he's basically unplayable, right? If and on the other hand, if he starts at, you know, in 35th or whatever it is, he's basically a lock. I shouldn't say that, you know what I mean? But so these salaries are created for this event without any knowledge of what these guys' upsides are yet. I mean, we really don't even know. So then what ends up happening is that you might end up getting lineups with like a whole bunch of 7K guys being like the optimal play, which is why you might get like 15,000 left on the table and 12,000 left on the table. Tell me the difference between how you would approach this week's trucks versus Xfinity versus the Cup race.
So, but before I jump into that, this is kind of another example of how this is different. Obviously, we've had the duels last year during COVID, but this is kind of going back to pre-COVID DraftKings, to where they would release the salaries before the qualifying positions were determined. So you would have value that would show up, you know, post-qualifying that wasn't a value before, or something like that. And so last year, DraftKings knew the qualifying, and so they would basically price up guys accordingly to what they should do projection wise, whereas now they won't be able to do that. In terms of the Cup Series race being different from Xfinity, being different from the Truck Series, bluntly, the Truck Series is filled with bad drivers, and so over half of the trucks will not finish the race, and so it turns into a very heavy place differential priority type of race. And so guys who start in the back, who realistically have a bad truck, or that would be quote unquote like slower than everybody else, because they're slower than everybody else, they'll most likely avoid the wreck that takes out the guys who actually have good trucks, and that's how they become good place differential plays. And so the trucks would lean way heavier on place differential being the most important, whereas Xfinity is almost a hybrid of the truck and the Cup Series, because the Cup Series is still stacked from the back, whereas Xfinity, it's not that those guys don't wreck, but typically those wrecks happen towards the back half of the field, to where, as I just said, for like the Truck Series, you'll have the guys who are so slow they won't be involved in the wreck, where Xfinity is, those guys are so slow and they're so bad, they're the ones who wreck. And so you typically still have to try and play guys that start at least in the middle of the pack on Xfinity, to where place differential takes a little bit of a hit in terms of the importance of it, and finishing position raises a bit more. And then the Cup Series is still, I think it's going to be more of a wreck fest for the Cup Series. Maybe not throughout the entire event, but I expect to see at least one big wreck take out at least 20 cars on Sunday.
Let me ask you this, and this is, I guess, a personal question. Remember, one thing, Bobby, about Brandon is he's very jaded. I mean, he's very over NASCAR. I mean, he makes no bones about it. When he goes on some of his rants, like his anti-NASCAR rants, I mean, like it's kind of legendary. And I feel as though that you're probably more pro wreckfest than the average person. Like I like, if it's like kind of close, you're like, it's gonna be a freaking wreckfest. Should be wreckfest. These guys are idiots. It's gonna be a freaking wreckfest. So I feel as though even more than most people, you're like, wreckfest. And you know, I've seen it happen. I've seen people try to play a green flag approach to this race. I've seen it happen. And if you go on and on for hours and hours, they're like, I'm good, I'm not good. It always happens. So I guess my advice is to not get too cute. Another content question. Again, people are going to ask about this. Somebody only has like a couple hours a week, or maybe an hour a week. What, I know you do your preview videos. Are you going to be doing live stuff with peers? I mean, tell me about that relationship a little bit. Like, what's a good way, aside from obviously donating to Patreon, that they can access some of like the most timely content that you're going to put out?
Yeah, so this year, and I did it for every single race I could last year. Obviously, sometimes I had like doctor's appointments or something that I couldn't do live shows with, but very similar to like what you guys do every day. Right before your NBA lock, you're right before everything locks and everything. I'll be live before every single slate locks this year, unless like the power goes out or something. And so I'll be live pretty much every weekend for an hour. Pierce will join me. Like tonight, he's going to join me. He's able to. If work doesn't allow him to join me, then he won't be. But I'll be live pretty much every single race this year. So that's like over 90 events. So pretty much every weekend from now until November, you'll see me live. And so in case you either can't support us on Patreon or you just aren't able to do a lot of research and you just want to make a lineup real quick, I'll be live and I'll be talking NASCAR pretty much every weekend.
What I want to do again is throughout the course of the year, depending on your availability, is have you come on and do the regular races a little bit from time to time, because I know that people have questions and what I see, this is what I do. I mean, Brandon, as you know, I look at the projections, I build lineups, then I'm like, okay, how do I cap ownership? How do I pivot a couple of times? How do I knock this guy out or whatever it is? And then I just kind of roll with it, and when people ask me what I do, I'm like, oh, this is my process. This works for me. But they ask me about drivers. I'm like, I don't know. That's the drill down word. That's the stuff that happens before it gets to me. So people do have questions or whatever it is. So maybe we'll do this. Maybe we'll do this again. Let me give me one. You answered most of the questions that were in the actual Discord channel, except for one thing. Adam Perry, who always has really, really good questions. Do you how much do you factor weather in, if at all, to your analysis of race in general?
So the only weather that I would throw in terms of temperatures for certain races, you'll have so a lower temperature or ambient temperature will lower the asphalt temperature of the racetrack, and that typically allows more grip between the contact area of the tire onto the racetrack. And so typically the cars will behave a lot better. And then you'll see certain guys who perform better in cooler conditions. I want to try and think of like a golf example, but I don't watch enough golf.
I got a better one.
Connect the dots there.
I got a better one, because this is what I was kind of more getting at, is sometimes in baseball, you don't want to play certain guys for fear that they won't finish the game or something like that. And when then you have rain risk. But sometimes in NASCAR, if the race goes a certain amount of time, it could be declared official, right? Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't, do you ever do stuff like I'll play more dominators if I think they can get washed out? I think of the Bubba Wallace race, from last year, when he after they paused it, him and all the supporters are just praying that the rain washes it out or the darkness comes before or whatever it is. Is that acting? Is that too fancy? Because one thing that's cool about these NASCAR races, they're always in areas that have these big freaking pop-up stores coming all the time. Is that any real part of your research, or is that just something that just you kind of just live with?
Yeah. So on all those, I mean, maybe it's a mistake that I'm making, because I'm pretty sure I've lost every single time a race does end under rain. But I guess for me, I'll at least finish on the point when I was saying temperature. And so the temperature in terms of where I know it's not going to rain, it's just a cold night or a cold day, that's where I would factor temperature into stuff. In terms of it's supposed to rain in 2.5 hours and this race is supposed to take 3 hours and 15 minutes. I just personally, I can't build lineups trying to predict when it's going to rain, if that makes sense. And so I just build them the same way. And like I said, I'm pretty sure I've lost every single time it rains early, but that's just not a battle that I really want to take.
Okay, so let's say I download projections. Let's say I just use your projections, for example. Let's say I download your projections for Daytona, and I run 20 lineups, and all 20 of them have everybody 31 and behind. Okay. And it's possible, you know what I mean? And it's possible. Would you ever, and again, this goes back to my other question, would that bother you? Or would you say, I can't have all these guys at 31 and behind. I gotta have something in the 20s, or would you just kind of run with it?
If I was running 20 lines, if it was the truck series, I I would be comfortable doing that. When we get to when we get to Cup and Xfinity, I would want to get more drivers in at least starting, 20th on back. And I think that's a good way to go about it. Like, while personally, I would feel comfortable playing 20 lines with just guys 31st on back. I know a lot of people aren't. And so for me, I would just build more lines after I get past those first 20 that include more drivers, starting 20th to 30th or 15th to 30th, whatever the case may be. To whereas if you're not able to build more lines, that's maybe a sense where I would, instead of playing all 20 lines with guys from 31st on back, I would probably do 10 lineups, including, that 9 player pool. And then the additional 10 lines, then I would start incorporating guys in the 20s and in the teens. That's what I would do.
All right. I covered a shitload, Bob. You had anything that's
No, it's great for my information. I literally feel like I know like 1,000 times more than I did before, which is still close to nothing, but it's this is really cool. And it's actually interesting from a strategy standpoint. Like it does give me some idea of how you guys do it. What does surprise me is when you're leaving 15 or 20,000 on the table, you're really still running into duplicate lineups?
I don't see it a lot. I do believe that if you're playing, which I assume that you will, if you're going to enter this weekend, if you're playing the Millionaire Maker this week, I think we're going to see way more duplicated lines than we've ever seen for these plate races before, just with the massive amount of people entering. I think it's bound to happen, but certainly on 10,000 or less type of contests, I don't run into a whole lot of duplicated lineups with those strategies.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's like very similar to golf in that sense too. I mean, I've seen guys leave a ridiculous amount on the money on the table in golf, and somehow it's still duplicated if you have 200,000 people playing in the event.
But one thing that's different, Bobby, is that there's legitimately, you could have a guy who is a $7,000 driver, like with the top projection. You know what I mean? The top raw projection, and that can happen if he's starting. Because the way these results distribute in these play races, if you get the 40 hole, were there 40 or 35? How many drivers are there?
40 for.
So if you end up with the 40 hole, and you are even like a reasonable driver, you're gonna have like a better raw projection than, let's say, Danny Hamlin if he draws the pole, at 10-5. Just because, again, if you just sit there and do nothing at like 40th, and you just wait for people to just freaking wreck, and you end up like 20th, like you smash. That's just kind of the way it works. Where Hamlin, he can, I use him as an example. If he gets the pole and wins the race, still probably doesn't even do all that much. I mean, yeah, I mean it does, but and that's why you can leave money on the table, even if you just don't do it on purpose. Even if, like, let's say you download Brandon's Suggestion or Stevie's Suggestion or anybody's, by the time like the starting positions come out and you run just a flat optimal, if you don't, you know what I mean, if you do nothing else, there's gonna be like 8,000 left on the table. But it's not like you're even forcing it. Like, that's the thing. And like what Brandon said, people like, I can't do this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm running, I can't do this. Why don't I just this one time I'll play Chase Elliott from the 3. You know what I mean? Like, I can't leave 8,000 on the table. I can do 2,000 on the table, but it doesn't work that way because of the way these salaries work. It could be that leaving 8,000 on the table, even without having done that artificially, right, might actually be the optimal. So that's or the optimal, a priori. It doesn't mean it won't be the optimal, but the optimal projection at the beginning.
Right. That's fascinating. Yeah, it's really interesting.
And it's usually only this race.
Yeah,
I'm
it's usually only
to
these
go this
super
weekend.
speedways. But this is a prime example. I know we hear about it like in football when somebody gets a garbage time touchdown or whatever, but this is a prime example of when real life performances and daily fantasy performances are just on opposite sides of the spectrum. You could have a tremendous day in real life, but if you start second and finish 4th, which is a good day in real life, you might be one of the worst daily fantasy scorers on the entire contest.
Right. That's
interesting. So I think that's another aspect that like just catches people off guard, because you play the guys who you see, start 8th, finish 8th, and you're like, wow, that's a great play. That's a great guy. Where in reality, when it comes to the DFS scoring, he's not going to be that good of a play.
Right. That's really interesting. I appreciate learning about this stuff from you guys. I feel like I'm in over my head, but it's actually really nice to like get some sort of idea on the strategy part of how to do this. And I definitely want to mess around and see what can happen.
All right,
Yeah,
Brandon.
and-
Well, again, if you guys want to support him on the Patreon, go to his Patreon site. If you guys want to see the free YouTube videos, go for that. Every once in a while, Brandon will drop a comment in our Discord channel, and he's got his own Discord channel as well. He's again, I not only respect his work ethic, I respect his honesty and his humility, and that means a lot to me. So that's it. Anything else, Brandon?
I don't have anything else. I just appreciate you guys having me on. And I mean, I'll jump on anytime this year. I know you're in the beginning, you were saying that, you wish it wasn't this week. Well, just invite me back and I'll be happy to hop on and talk to you guys.
Sounds great. All right. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks, Brandon. Take it easy, guys.